intensity around the country. But the aftermath of unprecedented flooding is presenting a myriad challenges. The main one being thousands of families that remain displaced this very minute. But schools will make a return to normalcy starting Monday next week, though a lot depends on the readiness of individual institutions. Elsewhere, bad weather prevails for Agriculture CS Mithika Linturi, whose impeachment trial got off to a stormy start, complete with lurid bedroom insinuations. But there is good news in the health sector. The doctor's strike is over. But is it? In some sense, public participation only makes sense if initiated. In Kaikai's Kika, an appeal to former Nairobi Governor Mike Sonko to release those recordings on revenue misappropriation. And on my memo, give it a chance that in a crisis, you may well be on your own. The Take takes a break tonight. This is the News Gang.
All parents are advised on the assessment of weathermen and on the assessment of the government of Kenya. All schools will be opened on Monday next week, and therefore parents must prepare their children to go to school.
One thing we want to say is that we have done an assessment in all our secondary schools and the primary schools in the country, and over 95% of our schools are ready for opening. The ones which are badly affected, I think, are less than 5%. And when I say badly affected, are those that some of them you will get that 100% of the toilets have sunk, have collapsed, such that because we don't have toilet facilities, it might pose a serious challenge for us to have students in those particular schools.
President William Ruto and Education CS, they're speaking about schools reopening. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. We heard the President saying the schools are going to reopen starting Monday next week. And the CS today visited some schools around Nairobi to try and assess how they are, whether they're ready to start receiving students from Monday. The rains are subsiding, thank God. But of course, there's a devastation that's been left behind. We have over 200 people who've lost their lives. There's some who are still missing in Maimahiu. We have thousands who have been displaced. We have thousands also who are in camps across the country. Many of those camps are in schools. And we're listening to some parents talking about how difficult it will be for them to actually have their children go back to school on Monday as the schools are still underwater. Gituku, are we taking this decision too soon, or should we just start and hope somehow that the situation will go back to normal sooner than we think?
Well, I've looked at the statement that was shared, I think, this evening by the Interior PS, Raymond Omolo, and he's saying that a lot of action is being taken to ensure that the affected schools are rehabilitated to be taken to their position, or they can be in a position to host the learners. But at the same time, you're looking at the impact on especially the education calendar, because we're already late. If it count up until Monday next week, you're already late by 2 weeks, during which time that the learners should have been in school, settled down for the second term. This is one of the terms that has a lot of activities when it comes to the school calendar itself for the whole 3 terms. So is it too soon? That's a difficult question to answer, bearing in mind that also there are close to 15 million learners who have not been able to go to school because of what has been happening. And obviously, not every other part of the country has been affected by the adverse effects of the heavy rains. So you find that there's some areas that are largely safe. If you look at the data that you're looking at, is that 1,967 are the schools that have been affected by these floods, that you would say that it would be difficult for even learners to get back to the classrooms. But there are those schools that, despite the heavy rains, they have actually withstood the test of the rains itself. So you're also wondering, how do you treat the learners whose institutions have no challenge, especially if you are to talk about the time that is getting lost. But then again, I think what is missing is what action will be taken for the learners that go to school in institutions that have been affected. Some of them have actually been destroyed. If you look at some images that we saw in Nairobi, there are classrooms whose walls have just been destroyed. They're down, meaning that it will also take some time to repair them. So obviously the president has said that the NGCDF kitties have been asked to support the process of repairing these classrooms. It takes time also to really allocate resources and say that this much will go to this institution to issue the tender or the contract that is supposed to be used for the repairs. So there's a bit of time that has to be done. But we hear the cabinet secretary saying that they are making arrangements to ensure that pupils or learners that whose institutions have been affected can actually be accommodated in nearby institutions. So has that been finalized? We have 3 days before then, that is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Tomorrow is a public holiday. Will the Ministry of Education officials and of course together with the officers under the National Government Coordination Facility or the NGAO officers, National Government Administrative Officers, is it sufficient time for them to make those arrangements and tell learners that yes, your school went down, but you'll be reporting to school Y? I'm not sure that communication has gone out. And obviously also if you had to reflect on what you were just saying, that some of these institutions are acting as their IDP camps or camps for the displaced persons, then how soon do you clear that to be in a position to accommodate learners who are required to be occupying those institutions come Monday? And
Gituko, as you talk about how little time the government has to actually get the schools ready, maybe we can listen to Josh Ochola, who lives in Kakola, somewhere in Nyanza, talking about what this means now that the president said that schools have to reopen. And then after that, I want us to listen to the head teacher of Mathare North Primary School, Boniface Matingi, because you talked about how there's a school where the walls have collapsed. I think there are 5 classrooms. Let's listen to them and we'll continue.
Hiyo maneno ya president sisi hapa naweza kubali, kwa maana hapa school bado iko maji. Classroom pia iko na maji. Na pale watoto anacheza pia iko na maji na nyoka kubwa kubwa. Hata saa hii sisi nasimama kwa maji.
All the books, we don't have any. They went underwater. Some of them we had to dry them and wash and dry them. All the certificates, all the documents, the records were underwater. The office was 1.5 meters underwater. All the documents were underwater.
We heard the minister saying today that they'll try and get all those certificates for them, reissue them and try and sort out the issue to do with books. But listeners, there's still so much more to be done. Some of these schools have students who are exam candidates. And I think there needs to be a bit more detail given by the authorities, by the ministry, on exactly when they'll go back. Because I was listening to a parent who was telling me that their school has told them that they've heard in the media that schools are being reopened on Monday, but they have not really gotten official communication from the Ministry of Education, maybe a circular that just officially says you're opening and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that needs to be done for us to go back to normal as soon as possible.
I think the randomness of the communication will still be a major concern for Kenyans. And one will only hope that the government will retreat and tidy that up a bit when it comes to communicating such major decisions. But I think the reopening of schools marks the beginning of a long journey to try and get things back to normal. And I think what we're going to see in the coming days is the proper mapping of how much exactly the damage was. And you saw the head teacher in Mathare North Primary School. Now, look, that's how it's going to go. From small units like a school, even smaller units like a family. What is your loss? What is the damage and all that? So this mapping, I suppose, is what is going to happen next, where the government has to be very clear on what exactly was damaged and how that damage can be addressed. And we're talking of the small things before we come to the bigger things like infrastructure. because when you look at the impact of the rains on a number of roads, there is a lot of work that will have to be done going forward. But small things to be appreciated. Look at how much of a difference just a pause of a day in the rains makes. Yeah. Even in Nairobi, you can imagine if it had continued pounding the last few days, the situation would be way more worse than it is currently. But we've had a pause of 2 days, and I'm talking about just Nairobi, for example, and you see the difference it has made, even in terms of the amount of runoff water that is out there. We don't see a lot of that is going down very quickly. And I think also a disaster has been averted because it is in the accumulation of the water that we had started seeing very serious effects, like the building in Udhiru collapsing. Who knows how far many of those structures that are in riparian areas were from the Udhiru situation, where building starts cracking or starts bending, because all it needs is just consistent percolation of that water in under the surface, and it weakens the base. So there's a lot to be grateful for in terms of just the 1 or 2 days of a pause. But yes, Monday marks the beginning of the journey to recovery. And journeys to recovery is actually takes long, depending on the damage that had been done. But in terms of scale, just putting it on scale, this is nothing compared to what Mozambique went through in 2000, when they had 4 weeks of cyclone coast occasioned rains. Here we've had a few weeks of rain that has been heavy, but a cyclone that actually did not do much damage. I mean, you look at 2005 and USA. I mean, a superpower had to deal with one of the worst hurricanes in Hurricane Katrina, which actually left families to death. You know, it's been 18, 19 years now, and to this date, they're still struggling to reconstruct. So the effects from such natural phenomena, such as rains or floods, can be really long-term. And just to say that we are expecting proper mapping from the government of how much is the damage, what has been done. And I think and we hope it's going to come through very organized communication, preferably written, that this is what we have gone through, not those, what we've seen today. The other day, schools were reopened off-cuff, and today the term has been extended again off-cuff. Yeah.
With no specifics.
Yeah.
No specifics.
One of the options that are being given to resettle those in the camps that are schools is taking them to churches and other centers of worship. That's one option. I was listening to the story from Nyeri, and that's what they were saying. But talking about camps, we have about 138 of them across 18 counties that are hosting those thousands of families. And Nairobi is one of the counties that is bearing the biggest brunt of the floods. There are about 35 such camps, and there are about 8,000 people in those camps. We have Tana River also with 30 camps with about 5,000 of them. Yesterday, we got a chance to visit one of those camps somewhere in Huruma. Our reporter Ben Curry was there, and he gave us a picture of what looked like a humanitarian crisis in the camps in terms of the number of people who are in the tents, food, hygiene. Maybe if we can listen to one of the ladies who were there, Betty Barasa. She's 8 months pregnant and is one of the thousands of people who are in that camp. And let her tell us a bit about what the situation is every day for them.
Lakini saa zingine tunaletewa uji haina sukari, tunaletewa uji haina escort. Sasa inabidi tu tukunywe sababu hatuna otherwise. upande. Hapa kwa hema tuko karibu watu 100. Sisi wajawazito, wamama wenye wako na watoto, wenye hawana, sisi wote tuko hapa. Sasa wakati wa kulala tunafinyana, hatuna nafasi, inabidi tu excuse mwingine pia apate at least mahali ya kulala. Hicho ndio tumeletewa, na hizo choo tunashare watu wote hapa kwa hii niseme tu hapa ground wote tunashare hizo choo mbili. Sasa unaweza enda upate choo labda ni chafu. Na sasa hii hali tuko sisi tunafaa tukuwe na mazingira safi. Choo ikuwe safi, lakini sasa inabidi tu uende choo ni chafu, mahali ya kuoga tunashare.
That is Betty Barasa. She's in one of those camps, as I said, in Huruma. And we spoke to several others who said they are facing the same situation. They don't have enough food. The sanitary conditions there are wanting. There are too many of them in the camps. She's worried about where she'll give birth. And this is just one. And there are, as you said, about 35 such camps in Nairobi. And recently, the government also launched the National Disaster Fund and started receiving some funding here and there from well-wishers and other organizations. But if this is what we are seeing in one of the camps, then what is the situation in other places, Gituku? Is it because of lack of planning, or is it being overwhelmed with the situation as is? What do you think?
Right. I mean, it's been challenging, and it's an indictment on many fronts, especially for the agencies that are responsible for taking care of such kind of things. And actually, if you look at the numbers now from the National Disaster Operation Center, they are talking about a higher number than that. It's about 167 camps. Mm-hmm. And out of that, you have 70,000 people that are staying in those camps. So it is quite a task, because these are people that were leading normal lives. They had their own clothes, they had their own food, they could access their own water. They were doing all these things by themselves. But now you have people that they have nowhere to call a home or even a house. So meaning they're having to share the facilities that are available. They are going to classrooms. You find that all they have mattresses and just little bedding for them to take comfort, especially during the night. But this is such a big challenge. And even if you look at the interventions that have been taken by even institutions like the Kenya Red Cross, it's not sufficient, because again, if you look at even the help that is coming, even the president mentioning that 10,000 shillings will be given to families affected. 40,000 is the number that he gave of the households. So you're talking about 10,000 shillings to be rent for the next 3 months. But beyond that, they obviously need food, they need comfort, they need clothes, they need to take their children to the schools. And so,
was it 10,000
per household? Per
household for 3 months?
That is to take care of the 3 months. So you're doing an average of about 3,000 plus shillings for accommodation every other month. So it is quite challenging. And if you look even at the bigger situation, because even if the government is saying that these learners, for instance, will be taken to nearby institutions, what does that exactly mean? How does a normal public institution work in this country? Yeah. You open school, you have to spend some few weeks waiting for resources, that is in form of capitation. So learners have come for a short time to stay in school X, yet they come from school Y. So what resources are they going to use to make them comfortable? So where's the capitation? Where are the desks that they're supposed to be sitting on? Would they also move with their teachers? And how does that work exactly? Because especially in urban areas, the public institutions are very congested. So you're creating space for who? Mm-hmm. So it's such a serious issue that even if you look at the statement that is coming from government, I just wanted to reference one of it. They are talking about, in terms of the recovery that Linus was talking about, they are looking at, let me just read it, that nationwide, as part of recovery, there are 4 issues they're highlighting. First is that nationwide tree growing day gazetted for May 10th, 2024 in solidarity with all persons adversely affected by the cyclic floods and recognizing current phenomenon as an effect of climate change. Of course, the day is tomorrow. Yeah. Work is supposed to be happening. The other issue of recovery is countrywide reopening of schools rescheduled to 13th of May 2024. And I'd want to just say something about that because it's been such an interesting 2 weeks, because on the 29th, when schools were supposed to reopen, is when we had the Cabinet Secretary postponing the reopening, of course, in the middle of the night. And then thereafter, there was a cabinet dispatch that came on Thursday last week, some 3-4 days thereafter. And it said that schools would reopen on the 6th because the postponement had been pushed to 6th of May, which was Monday this week. That was on Thursday. The following day, on Friday, the president said that the school reopening had been postponed indefinitely. That was Friday. Then yesterday, on Wednesday, the president said that now we have agreed, based on the advisory from the weathermen and sources in government, the schools will be reopened on Monday. Still, no circular has been seen. And then today, this is when the Cabinet Secretary is talking about what will happen to the schools that have been adversely affected, but also talking about the extension of the term, again with no specific issue. So it talks about, obviously there's a challenge of communication, but I think the bigger challenge is on planning. Have those responsible sat down and looked at every issue in detail to say that, yes, we know the learners are supposed to go back to school, because the communication of the principal secretary is saying that those in boarding schools are supposed to be reporting from tomorrow up until Monday, so they'll have time to travel back to the institutions. So have we sat down, has the government sat down and looked at every nitty-gritty? Because at the end of the day, you're not just dealing with schools, you're dealing with real human beings in the name of children that are supposed to, on Monday, their parents that are devastated, they don't know what to do. Some of these 70,000 that are in IDP camps, they have children that are supposed to be reporting to school. So what is the clarity in ensuring that they know what they're supposed to be doing? As you say that some of them will be moved from the IDP camps to churches, but churches have days of worship, either Saturday or Sunday. So what happens on that particular day? So all this is missing, and one only hopes that there's someone behind the scenes doing much of the thinking to make sure that the solutions are available, especially now that Kenyans really need them.
Because there's a worry that all this that you've mentioned has to be done at some point. There are some immediate ones that are more urgent that have to be done before Monday. I don't know if there are any that can need a bit more time for them to be done. So should they look at having schools open in phases for some students or others, or should they maybe push it for another week? I know the calendar has already been messed up. There are students who are doing exams this year, the same ones who were affected during COVID, and there's a frustration and worry about whether they'll be able to do their exams. But Linus, we finally listened to the weatherman, finally, and we're taking decision based on the fact that we're told that the rains are going to subside and will not have the situations that we've seen before. But what exactly do you think should be done differently this time so that we actually have a situation which is almost seamless for students who are going back to school and avoid the frustrations that will come with them going to schools that are not there, or having parents having to worry about, should I send my child to school on Monday or not? What exactly would be better planning from the government?
First, and this requires the cooperation of natural factors. If there are no rains between now and Monday, then, or if they are not as heavy as they have been, then it actually means that we can get to a fairly good start to school, especially in areas that were not worst hit by the floods. By elimination, we need to put aside areas like Nyando, which are really under water right now. Areas like Tana River, where displacement was even caused by the initial rains. You remember the onset of El Nino rains. The displacement had already happened in Tana River. Garissa, sections of it, which along the Tana River. So by elimination, you can actually map out and see the areas that are worst affected, where obviously the return to normalcy will not be as immediate as it will be in some schools on Monday, because there are places that will pretty much just get back to normal on Monday when schools reopen. But here is one thing that really stood out for me, because I really hope the floods are behind us. Maybe the rains will be going down as predicted by the weatherman, that it will subside significantly towards the middle of the month and going to the end of the month. Here is one thing that has not happened. This crisis has not produced heroes. And that is something that should really concern us as a country. There have been heroes, and I want to call them unsung heroes, because you're talking of the people, for example, who are saving people in their fellow residents in Mathare, in some of those flooded areas. These are Kenyans who, through ingenious ways, they got to the center of fast-flowing water and saved their colleagues. I remember there was some footage of people who walked using a rope and held each other, 6 of them, to some place, and actually saved one person. Those are our heroes. But where should the concern be? Our concern should be on the formal emergency response regime, because every country ought to be able to respond to emergencies, and especially of a natural kind. Floods of the kind that we've experienced was a major test for this country to also produce its heroes. In Mozambique in 2000, when the floods happened, there were so many pilots that really, helicopter pilots that emerged as heroes. Helicopter pilots from the Mozambican Air Force, and also from neighboring countries like South Africa that had sent in help. Here, we almost have no formal heroes. There is absolutely no single name that stood out as the face of our emergency response. And let's not try what has not worked elsewhere. Political leadership cannot be the face of emergency response. Experts would be the face of emergency response. In Hurricane Katrina, although the government and the presidency, Washington, and every arm of the federal government put everything into it, it was General Russell Honore, an army officer, that really became the face of the emergency response. And all the support, including government support, was rallied around this man who led the response in New Orleans, which was the worst hit place. Now, for us, we've done several weeks of these heavy rains, and we haven't seen formal heroes. Formal heroes would be in uniform. Formal heroes would be in flak jackets, maybe. They could come from the civilian side. And to me, it points out to our soft underbelly when it comes to emergencies. We really don't have structures that are made for a day like this. And we really grope in the dark. There's been a lot of effort, especially through maybe the Ministry of Interior and National Coordination of National Government, where CS Kindiki would go to Kijabe, and then they physically identify some danger there. I mean, but this still doesn't save us the blushes around the fact that we don't have structured emergency response. Finally, this was just water. And I think I posed this question last week, Sam. What if there's a fire? There was an interesting appearance before the Senate the other day where those in charge of our fire response in the biggest city in the country, which is Nairobi, their qualifications are being paraded by Senator of Nairobi, Senator Sifuna. And, it sounded like, a very religious list, a number of theological qualifications. And those will be the people to respond in case there is a fire of significant and horrible proportions. And to those qualifications, God save us. It's risky. I think we just need to take emergency response seriously. there have been lessons. There have been very, very major lessons and key lessons are out of the last few weeks of this heavy rains. And why not just hope that these lessons will be taken and our emergency response mechanism be in place. Sorry, my mind goes back to 98, which is the bomb blast. Don't tell me where you are, Sam, because I know exactly where you were.
Carry on.
And in 98 also, the bombing of the American embassy and the cooperative building and the Fundi house collapsing. We saw a very well-coordinated response. On the government side, it was led by the military. And I remember it was Major General George Agoi who was the leader of the government response. And then on the Kenya Red Cross side, we were working with the likes of Abbas Gulet. And you know, his team were there, you know, throughout. But fast track to our floods. Who are the faces you remember as the faces of our emergency response? Guys, if you have then the faces, you can share for my benefit as well.
We are taking a short commercial break now. Remember, there's also the fear of waterborne diseases. Gituku, you were talking about it on Data Point, about cholera cases now being reported. And of course, there's the worry about food shortages because we have thousands of acres of arable land and agriculture now being underwater. I was watching farmers in Narok talking about how now their crop has been washed away. So there are those two issues now that you have to think about, waterborne diseases and food shortages. You're watching The News Gang. Thank